Australia is a big country. Australia is also a land shaped by wildfire in many places. Join me as we travel around this great country, meeting people and talking with them, and together their stories will come together and help us better explain Australia's complex relationships with wildfire. Welcome to Talking Wildfire Australia, my friends. Welcome to Talking Wildfire Australia. Today I have somebody really interesting here I'd like you to meet. This is Grant, and Grant has an interesting background in fire in Australia and also other things. And Grant, can you tell us about who you are, how you got involved in fire, and anything else you'd like to tell us?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So, hi everyone. My name's Grant Beck. I'm a 35-year-old firefighter here in Australia. I've been firefighting now for, almost 15 years. And that started 15 years ago when I first moved up to a remote town in the Blue Mountains and in the Gross Valley called Bowen Mountain. We moved up there, and within 3 months of moving into that house, we were faced with our first wildfire. So 3 months after moving in as a young teenager, we had to evacuate out very quickly, and that was probably my closest experience to wildfire growing up, but always growing up around wildfire, living in and around the Blue Mountains. So from there, I decided, look, I probably should get in and throw a helping hand now that I live in one of the most bushfire-prone places in the world. So we joined my local Grossvale Fire Brigade. I turned up there one day and said, how do I help? And from there, it's been a long and exciting journey. Michael, it's been started off doing my basic firefighter, just learning the basic principles about firefighting and how to help and help your community. Spreading knowledge about how to maintain your property, look after, prepare it for when, disaster does strike, because it's not a matter of if, but usually but when up there. And then from there, I really got interested in other areas. So I spent many years advancing my knowledge, going through my advanced firefighting, learning more about how fire reacts with weather and topography, as well as then joining the remote area fire team. So about 5 years, or 5 years after I joined the remote area firefighting team in the Hawkesbury, which was quite small back then. It wasn't a huge area of the fire service. They were still in their infancy a bit, learning how we can fight firefighting, doing a lot of dry firefighting techniques, and similar to what they do in other places around the world, similar to smoke jumpers and things like that. Obviously, no parachutes for us, but definitely how we can use some of those dry firefighting techniques to help stop wildfires in their early stages, be it a lightning strike or a fire that might drop into a remote or hard to reach area. So I spent a lot of time meeting people like yourself and other people who are like ourselves. We're all there for the same cause of how we can help, and we all come with a vast array of skills and backgrounds. Obviously, it's not our full-time job. We're all volunteers, and so we all have different varieties of backgrounds. Myself, I'm a builder by trade at the core, but we had other people who were corporate background who would take off the suit and tie and throw on the firefighting jacket and come out and help. So I've been, still am a part of that in a way of supporting wherever I can, and then really spent the last 10 years then furthering my knowledge. So I then decided, after doing all the remote area firefighting, joining my local brigade, learning my skills and experiences in my career life, I started in insurance about 10 years ago. And from there, obviously, part of insurance is we would assess house fires, be it from it could be from a wildfire event, but could just be an accidental fire or a deliberate fire or anything in between. And I found that really interesting, and how you've got this insurance world, a disaster that struck, be it man-made, accidental, or from nature. And I really started to think, I'd love to know more about this. I'd love to know more about how this all comes together, the insurance, the building, the firefighting. How can I bring all that together? So I was supported by my employer at the time to go off to university, and I studied a graduate diploma of fire investigation. And that was really exciting. You really got to learn the science behind the fire. And one of the things that two things they first taught me at my first lecture I went to was, you'll never look at fire the same again. And if you ever get caught for arson, he never taught you well enough. So that was the two things they taught when I walked in from my lecturer. But it was really interesting, because it was true. You don't look at a fire exactly the same again. You're always wondering how, why, where did it start, where did it go, how did it move through that either that landscape or that structure. And then you want to also then be able to provide that knowledge back to people to sort of say, how can we prevent past knowledge and try to make the best out of a bad situation. So for most of my career has been, doing community engagement, be it in the insurance world. I've done lots of TED Talks around climate and how that impacts insurance. So how, what do we see in waves? And we do see this, it does come in waves in the insurance world. And then, the severity tends to mix. It moves around the country. In the career part of my insurance space, I've seen most of the natural disasters that have hit Australia in the last 10 years, be that cyclones, bushfires, floods. I've even done an earthquake in Melbourne now. So that's, you get to see all these different events that happen. And the biggest part behind it is just helping people. So that's a little bit about me, I guess, in the last 15 years, but predominantly spent around wildfire in the Blue Mountains is the majority of it.
Grant, I understand that, like me, that you've dedicated a lot of your life to fire and dealing with fire, natural responses to emergency situations. And what do you actually feel about fire? I know that the general public tends to see fire one way, and being around it so much, I see it a different way. But I'm curious, how do you see fire, and what do you think about natural disasters itself?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I definitely understand the scariness and the evil and destruction that comes with what most people see when they see wildfire, and the destruction that it brings with it. From my side, I see something that's still lots to learn, I guess, for us as firefighters, and I'd like to consider myself an expert in that area now. And so from my side of things, I see fire from its scientific form as a form of energy. It's heat, it's energy. It needs those three elements, fuel and heat and oxygen to be able to live and breathe. But how we see it move through landscapes or move through structures is still so much to learn for us as humans. So while, yes, when it comes through, it brings a lot of destruction usually in its path. But is there a way that us as a global community can learn more, understand more, prevent, pass that knowledge on to younger generations, other communities, other religions and races? Is that how we can help people understand how to better deal with evil, so that we don't see it as that as much as part as something that's, it's the same as what happens when we have rain, and then we have rain, and then we have a flood, and we move and we deal with that in our own ways. How do we deal with this in that way as well? That's probably a big part of how I see it. Something that's still lots to learn.
Is there a change now? Like, I know other people have told me that they believe that they're seeing a generational shift. What are you seeing with that?
Yeah, look, it's a generational shift, definitely. I know when I first went and joined, 15 years ago, and I I turned up to the Grossvale Rural Fire Station. I was probably the youngest member by at least 10 or 20 years. And so there was all this knowledge from the generations that were there at the time. I think there's a big gap for sure. I'm 35, around my age. There's a lot of misunderstanding around fire, and I've seen that a lot from the insurance side. The age brackets that I go and see for people who have had house fires, from a lot of accidental fires, from maybe not understanding that not looking when cooking, and leaving things unattended, overloading power boards, all of those sorts of things that have led to fires. Definitely a generational gap there of understanding. Also, I think a big part, two other probably main factors. One, how we interact with, if we talk about wildfire, the urban sprawl and growth that's gone now into that densely vegetated areas is a lot more prevalent now than maybe it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so, with that became more affordable housing, things like that. So younger generations got in there but didn't understand the risk that came with that. And then from a structure fire side of things, we've seen a huge growth in more manufactured materials from overseas. We see there was a scientific study a little while ago that showed the build-up of a fire and what we call flashover or fully involvement of a room fire. If we looked at materials that were from the 60s, 70s and 80s, lot more hardwoods, natural materials, cottons and fibres that were used here in Australia. Now we see those with a lot more imported materials, lots of petroleum-based foams and materials in mattresses. So we've seen that go from what used to take 10 to 20 minutes for a room to become fully involved with fire. We now see that down to as low as 3 to 4 minutes.
Wow.
So with that is a huge shift in how we need to understand fire. So we see fire services now pushing for, make sure your smoke alarms are working, because when you don't have a long time, that smoke alarm is the difference between, you're having time to get out and potentially not. So definitely, I think, the two parts. One, generational, definitely, we need to get younger people, all different cultures, religions, races, understanding that this is an element that's not going away. As we move into more, we're going to see more fire. We see the temperatures rising around the globe. We see more wildfires happening around the globe. So definitely it's not going anywhere. It's still here on our footsteps, on our doorsteps, sorry. But definitely also with that, we need to understand that, potentially a new way of learning and understanding how fire works with materials that we have these days. I guess another one's lithium. We see a lot more lithium ion fires and batteries failing and things like that, thermal runaway. So that's a new type of fire that we're seeing now that we didn't see 50 years ago. So yeah, there's lots to, I guess, take in, and that can cause lots of different reactions.
Insurance and fire every day. Do you see patterns, and anything that you would like to share with listeners about what they can do to make their house more safe, or to make anything? What do you think on that?
Yeah, for sure. I've been doing house fires in the insurance space and total loss fires from wildfire as well now for the best part of 10 years. And there are trends. You do see lots of trends go through. When I first started 10 years ago, cooking fires was definitely the big one. Cooking with oil on the stove top, and that causing a fire if that oil starts to overcook and starts to burn and reaches its flash point. But now we've seen a big shift into more, electrical fires, be it lithium ion batteries or overloaded power boards. People don't realise that, your general 4-port, 6-port power board, if you do overload those, they will quickly fail and generate large amounts of heat. So probably the biggest call out from a dwelling perspective is, if you don't have enough power points and you're looking like you're overloading those power boards, get an electrician in, put in some more power points, make sure you got the right amount of circuitry in your house to run, the TV and the DVD and the Xbox and the PlayStation and all of those things, rather than just what we call daisy chaining or piggybacking power boards. That usually results in quite catastrophic events. The lithium-ion battery side of things, we've definitely seen a huge trend in house fires from thermal runaway of lithium products, and battery packs recharging and things like that. So the biggest thing we can say there is avoid trying to buying cheap batteries and componentries off from overseas. Buy from a reputable company that that's got a warranty, and they're generating that they're manufactured in a safe and proper way. One of the things I learned when I was at uni was or back at school, the periodic table of elements, and you've got the left hand side. I remember a teacher always saying, the left hand side, you don't play with anything on this side. It's all pretty dangerous, and lithium's up there, in the top three. So, amazing. It holds great amounts of energy to be able to use batteries and phones, and it's in everything we use these days, cars. But if it does have that reaction, it does tend to end in a pretty catastrophic way. It generates massive amounts of heat rapidly and quickly. So that's probably one of the two main things. If we talk about wildfire in the insurance space, preparing your property, a lot of the fire services around Australia really talk about get ready weekends and preparing your property. It might sound something easily to forget or not to worry about. It really is an important thing. Over all the years of firefighting myself, it's not the main fire front that does the damage. It's the embers that come through either before or after that's burning around your house or after it's gone past. So making sure you're cleaning around your house, around your property, removing fuels away. The cane or the wicker seating set, get that away from the house. Anything that might be combustible. Invest in a really good gutter guard system. Something that's got a steel mesh that's going to help prevent those embers getting in and underneath your roof line or into your gutters, preventing that build-up of vegetation in the gutters. And then, just cleaning around your house, making it as fire-ready as it can be in the event that something does happen. And we've seen that pay off dividends for hundreds of customers over the years, people who put in that little bit more time and effort into cleaning up around their property before the season.
Fires and floods are related. And I'm sure that you've dealt with a lot of floods in your career. To speak about floods for a few minutes, is there anything that you could share with people about dealing with floods or preparing for floods?
Yeah, definitely. So, look, I've been involved in a number of floods around Australia from the insurance part, probably the most recent being the Lismore floods that came and were quite devastating. There always is a correlation. Usually floods, drawn by large amounts of rainfall. Those large amounts of rainfall are then usually predominantly with quick and fast growth, because usually after the flood, the weather's quite nice. And so we see lots of growth in the vegetation. And that vegetation eventually will cure and get to a point where it is, available to burn. But preparing for a flood is we do a lot of things. One of the companies that I used to work for spent a lot of time heavily investing how to flood ready your house and what are things you can do to maybe minimize the loss if a flood's coming. Unfortunately, if a flood's going to come through your house, it's going to come through your house. There's not a lot we can do to prevent it by, you can do what you can, sandbag and things like that. But if the water comes up, the water comes up. So understanding materials that are a bit more water resistant than others. Things like using villa board and so more of a compressed cement type wall lining product, brick, those sorts of things, rather than plasterboard. So paper and plasterboard are a lot more resilient to those floods. A lot of governments are now doing a lot of incentives around raising your house. If your house is already on stumps or piers, you can raise your house up higher to get it out of some of those flood levy height sort of areas to get you up a bit higher out of the ground. But overall, making sure that, a lot of things we've seen in Queensland in 2011 was that a lot of those old Queenslanders, younger people, moved in and they thought, I've got all this space underneath my house. So they'd turn them into games rooms and maybe a spare bedroom for one of their children as they grow up. And then, it was so long between floods. And then unfortunately, these devastating floods came through for these Queenslanders that were originally built for floods. Excuse me. They did, unfortunately, cause a lot of damage because there hadn't been a flood in so long. A younger generation moved in that didn't understand why Queenslanders were essentially built in the way they were. And then they've done a lot of damage. So we're starting to see a shift in that now. Brisbane's had the 2011 floods. They had another lot of floods in 2022. The same with Lismore. So we are starting to see more awareness happen, especially in the Brisbane region in Queensland and in Lismore, understanding that, look, these floods are coming again and they will happen again and we need to be as prepared for them as we can. Insurers will do as much as they can to provide awareness as well. A lot of these build it back better and things like that companies like Suncorp do that help people and communities and generations understand, what works and what doesn't during a flood.
Grant, while we're talking about insurance, can we talk about insurance policies? I know that you've dealt with this so much of your career, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of things happen over and over again. Is there anything you can share with our listeners that could help them in the future towards picking a policy or anything else you can think of?
Yeah, for sure. From my side of things, it's always make sure you read the PDS. I know it seems like you see it at the fine writing at the bottom of all of those ads, but it is really important that you find a policy that is suited to you, and not just to you from a contents what you might own in your house, but where you live as well is really important. Understanding the environment that you live in, and being a policy that is, suits both you, your family, the contents that you own, as well as your property and where it is on the face of the earth, I guess. A lot of policies in Australia allow you to opt out of flood. So if we still talk about flood, they'll allow you to opt out. And if you live in an area that is flood prone, definitely, while it might have a really big saving on what your premium would be per year, it's something to maybe sit down and think about and maybe work out how you budget for, to make sure that if that flood does ever happen, that you are covered. After the 2011 flood, the Gillard government back then did a lot of work around streamlining wording in policies for flood. So it's pretty much now, when they talk about a flood, it's any body of water, land body of water that rises, essentially. So it can come from a river, stream, creek. It could be from a dam opening and overflowing. All those sorts of things they class as a flood. So it's basically overland water that inundates an area. Not from the ocean. That's different if that's storm surge or a tsunami, but it's basically from a river, creek, stream. And it doesn't matter if it's been from a dam overflow. That's their definition of flood. So being covered for that, if you are in those low-lying areas or in flood-prone areas, is very important to make sure you have a look at the policy, see what it includes under that loss cause flood. So all policies will always have what they call their loss causes that they cover. And you'll see things in there like fire and flood, theft, earthquake, tsunami, malicious damage, all those sorts of things is what they cover off. And after that 2011 as well, and recent royal commissions over the years into the finance and the banking sector, has made them a lot easier for customers to read. So many years ago, you basically needed a law degree to be able to understand or interpret them. Now they are very easy to understand, and they're very easy to guide and navigate through. A lot of them have pictures as well to sort of define what they're talking about. But that flood one's pretty important because there is the option that some policies will come with it as a standard. So when you buy the policy, it comes with flood as a standard. Some other policies don't come with it as standard, and you have to choose to what they say opt in for flood. So really just asking that person, ringing up the insurance company, making sure, having a chat with a consultant on a phone can mean the world. I live in a flood-prone area. What does your policy give me for flood? Asking those questions is really important. Bushfire, the best way that when I was in insurance from a policy perspective, they always used to use a couple of sayings. So if there's no flame, there's no claim. So there has to be a flame for a fire. They don't cover things like, scorching from an ember, or, if an ember pops out of your fireplace and burns your carpet, those sorts of things, unless you've got what they call accidental damage cover. But a lot of it is around, if you have a bushfire, chances are, if that bushfire causes damage to your property, you're covered under that lost cause of fire. But really just making sure that you read that PDS, understand what's in it. Is it right for you and where you live? And as for how much you should be insured for, always making sure there's a lot of really good calculators on the insurer's websites. Go and use those calculators. One of the biggest things I've seen is when disaster does strike, and you can go in and fantastic, you're covered for all of this, let's help. They're underinsured on the values and the limits that they have, so be it for either their contents or their building. So also, when you go through each year and you see that renewal come around and you see how much you've got for your house and your contents, sitting down and understanding, all right, if the worst case scenario happened and I had to rebuild my house, what would that cost in today's market? So having a bit of a look around, understanding what materials cost, understanding what contents cost. A big misconception is people will say, oh, well, yeah, mum and dad gave me that lounge or that bed, so I got that for nothing, so I don't need to worry about that. But if the worst happened and you had to go out and buy a lounge or a bed tomorrow, it's going to cost, a sum of money, to go and buy a new bed and a new lounge. So it's understanding that you need to include those items that you might have been gifted or mum and dad gave you or whatever it might have been. You need to understand that they need to be included in that figure, because you need to replace them if they were to ever be destroyed. So there's a big part that comes into it, but making sure you sit down and find the right policy that suits your needs, both personally and where you live, as well as sometimes it's just I'm a little bit old-fashioned, even though I'm only 35. Sometimes picking up the phone and ringing a claims consultant or a policy consultant to ask them some of those questions is worth its weight in gold.
Hopefully we can have you back another time and talk some more about other subjects. Thanks a lot for your time, Graham.
Not a problem at all. Thanks, Michael.
We're doing this for all of you. If you like what we're doing, please give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment below. See you next time.